All right, so here we're going to be doing a technique of preparing a vacuum filtration, and we're going to do two methods here, one using our aspirator which we plug in, and then another aspirator here which is attached to the sink, and we use just the flow of water to create suction, okay? So depending on what lab station you're at, we're going to be using whatever piece of equipment that is most convenient to accommodate social distancing. So, as you remember, this is our aspirator, we have our ring stand, this is our clamp, which we're going to use to secure our suction flask, right? So we have our suction flask, which I will secure here using our ring clamp, right? I put the suction nozzle, the side arm, if you will, our side arm from the flask out, so I'll be able to connect my tubing connected up to the aspirator, right? As we know, we're going to have to use the Buchner funnel here. So we have our Buchner funnel, rubber stopper, one hole. We have the inside where we'll put our filter paper. We're going to be using the 5.5 centimeter guys. And like so. You have your filter paper, make sure that there's only one, because if you have more than one piece of filter paper in there, you're actually going to have a harder time getting your suction going. As you remember from last semester, it's always important to wet the filter paper, especially around the sides, so we create a nice seal which will prevent any of our solid from going on in, slipping underneath, and then dripping into the Buchner funnel. Or rather the sidearm flask, right? So I have this here, filter paper's in, check, and then we got our whole setup done here. So this is if you're using the vacuum, which we're using for the vacuum aspirator, which we'll plug in. And to do that, we have a switch on the side, flip it on, and you can see that water will come off when I add, right? So I will remind you when doing this, it's very important to vent your flask before you turn off your source of suction, right? So for here would be the switch, for over here would be the water valve to stop the water flow. And it's important to do this because if we leave this vacuum set up and we cut off this source, we can actually get backflow. So the pressure building up here, depending on how much solid you're collecting, or filtrate you're collecting, you can actually create this negative pressure, which will bring the water in the aspirator back into your solution. That's terrible if we're trying to just collect this solution, which we are trying to do. The first step is filtering off the impurities or any of the non-essential the non-essential components of this ore. It'll filter it off. So I'll actually be getting rid of this filter paper in the first step of the copper ore lab and keeping the solution in the flask. So again, just to reiterate, if we're using the sink method with the water, connect the hose and same deal. I'll get my suction source from the water pulling through the aspirator, and then you can see that we get a really nice filter. Okay? So that's what we're doing for our techniques. And again, I'll remind you, see I almost did it. You're going to vent first, and then turn off the suction source. Okay, so that's the technique for using vacuum filtration, whether the aspirator that's power sourced or from our sink. We try not to use a sink one because we waste a ton of water, whereas this here, we're just using the simple electricity and to get that power source. So remember to vent, remember to rinse your filter paper with some water to glue it down, and be mindful of what you're collecting during whichever step of the filtration. So I'll get back into this with the actual experiment for the procedure, and you'll see how to do that. Thanks guys so much, and enjoy the lab.